Today we're catching up with Trenton Romph, head of marketing at Clozd. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yep, you got the last name and the company name right. So
Oh,
kudos to
gosh.
you, because
You're
not everybody
golden.
gets them both right.
It's so great to have you here, and I'm so excited to chat and pick your brain and, I don't know, put you in the hot seat here for a minute.
Cool. Sounds great.
So let's just start by getting really deep with it. Some businesses are taking the time to do win-loss analysis. Some aren't doing it at all. Maybe it's not even on their radar. I'd
Sure.
love to start by asking if you could give us your number one piece of advice for anyone listening. What should they be thinking about right now? Like, what opportunities are they missing?
In the world of win-loss analysis specifically?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a couple of things. So the first is stop trusting your CRM as much as you do, especially when it comes to win-loss analysis. We recently just did a deep dive. I personally did this with our data science team, where we combed through tens of thousands of opportunities that we get from CRM data. And we then go and interview buyers on these opportunities. And I combed through a ton of these and compared what did the CRM win-loss data say versus what did the buyers say. And the difference was just so compelling. For example, 65% of the time, sales reps marked the wrong competitor. So 65% of the time, either they didn't know who the competitor was they were going against, or they just kind of lazily selected like the first competitor in their drop-down list. But the problem is, in a year or 6 months later, somebody on a strategy team or some rev ops person or someone in leadership is going to pull a report from the CRM and try to figure out who is our strongest competitor, who are we losing to. And once they pull that report, they're going to sit down and say, okay, this is who we're losing to 65% of the time. And we need to shift our strategy against them. We need to build this feature. We need to sell like this. We need to talk like this in marketing. What are the gaps in our brand strength versus them? And you completely index all of your resourcing to the wrong competitor, at least 65% of the time. So that's one of the findings we had. The other one is the loss reason in the CRM is usually a one-item pick list. It's like 3 words. It'll say pricing or product or API or things like that. Mm-hmm. So we compared the loss reason in the CRM to what the buyers said influenced the deal on the loss. And the really interesting thing is the CRM has 1 reason, and the buyers tell us on average 4.5 or about 5 reasons. And when I compared these, the 1 reason didn't match either of these 5 reasons 85% of the time.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It's like so unsettling.
It is unsettling. I know. And I'm seeing these discrepancies on win-loss analysis data, more specifically in marketing. We've seen this for a long time, and no one's really like tried to bring it up as much as maybe like Chris Walker at Refine Labs is now, where lead source data, attribution data, we've all kind of just settled into this rhythm of like, well, it is what it is, and let's just go. But a lot of times we just ignore finding out the truth. And we've heard over and over in our careers, the CRM is your source of truth. Mm-hmm. If it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. All of these catchphrases about the CRM is your source of truth. And I think it's BS. I think your buyer is your source of truth. And if you're not going out consistently and in a very, very, very efficient way, asking buyers what really motivated their decision to buy your product or not, you are not getting the truth about how they heard about you, like your marketing efficiency. You're not getting the truth about your strengths and weaknesses, why you win and lose. And at the end of the day, you're guiding your company completely in the wrong path. And this sometimes sounds like, man, that's very much of a like sales world or lead gen world. As a content marketer, I don't know if that really impacts me that much. I hear this from content marketers all the time. Like, well, I don't really control leads or revenue. I don't have that much impact on it. So I don't know if I should be bonused on that. I don't know if I should be measured on that. And you're partially right, because these are difficult things to measure, typically the way marketers have been taught to measure things, by just tracking touch points in a CRM.
Right.
So Yeah. So one of the things I would focus on is, and we can talk about deeper into that in a minute here, but I would focus right now, especially with the economy, the state of things that we're in, where pipeline is kind of drying up.
Yep.
Every opportunity you have is even more precious than it was before. So do everything you can to shore up your win rate. And the best way to do that is to uncover the actual reasons you're winning and losing, the truth behind why you win and lose. And the best way to do that is talk to buyers.
Gosh, there's like so much to unpack in everything you just said.
I know that's way too long of an answer.
I know. No, it's great because I think, one, you're right. There's sort of this instinct to not go deeper and to just kind of take whatever's there and be like, okay, I guess this is what it is, to your point.
Yeah,
But
totally.
that discovery and also like questioning, like there hardly ever is just one singular reason. Like unless it's like, oh, you're too expensive, right? Like it's related to price. Like there really is several reasons and our buyers are weighing that list. And so to your point, I think that deeper discovery and really getting into that is important. As it relates to content marketing, it's common for us to sort of focus on messaging that we think will resonate, building content that we think is going to align with, our buyers, get them to our site, hit those touch points across all channels. And what I find is something that, made sense to me when we launched our rebrand back in August doesn't make sense anymore. And I think about that time between August and now. I'm like, well, crap, we had this message that we thought made a lot of sense. Now we're finding it doesn't make sense. So I guess my next question is, when we're creating, our website, messaging, ads, one sheets, all of these things to support our sales partners to help bring in these leads, what are some best practices to understand like what's working and what isn't?
Yeah, totally. This is an awesome question. And the first time in my career, I feel like I have a very solid method and answer for it because of what we're doing at Clozd and how much we do it at Clozd. I was just at a conference actually, and I hate to call people out, but I was standing in the back and I had to hold my tongue. I just wanted to like yell out the answer, but someone was presenting about messaging, this exact question, messaging and content. And someone asked them the question, how do you know your messaging is working? Like after you've gone through all the work of interviewing buyer personas and interviewing sales and figuring out how you fit in the market, and you create this whole new messaging framework, and then it gets applied all over to your website, to the sales demo, to email campaigns, like everything you do. This person just asked a simple question like, well, how do you know all that work was worth it? How do you know your messaging is working? And the person didn't have an answer. They started to say, well, I don't really love tracking metrics like website visitors, or like how many visitors hit the website, or conversion rate on the website, like that kinds of stuff. She actually ended up saying, it's kind of like product market fit. You just feel it. Like, you have it. You can just feel you have it. That's how messaging fit works. And the whole time I was just yelling, like in my mind from the back, just ask your buyers, like just ask them, does this work? And there's some really cool tools out there where you can actually ask before you launch your messaging, like Winter. If you've seen Pip Laja and Winter, like I think that's a very interesting concept to test your messaging before launch. But in my world here at Clozd, what we do to measure the effectiveness of messaging and our content and our brand strength, all of these different things that are hard to measure items in marketing. Like it is hard to measure them unless you're trying to measure them by like conversion rate and how many visitors did I get to this thing, how many impressions did I get to this thing. And all of us know, like anybody that's done intent data research or looked at intent data tools, a lot of times when you apply those tools, you're like, well, they're telling us we have intent leads hitting our website. When you peel back the layers, it's like people that are trying to get hired to your company, students a lot of time, especially in some industries, like students are hitting your website a lot.
Mhm.
People trying to sell to you makes up a ton of your traffic, competitors. And once you take out all of these traffic sources, you're left with like some intent, maybe, but you never really know if it's intent. You're like, well, maybe they just loved the way your website looks, but they have no intention of buying you ever, right? So those intent data tools kind of fall apart for me to measure like what's actually happening, like when you measure just impressions or views. So the way we do it at Clozd is we try to interview every single buyer, every single opportunity that comes through our pipeline. And some of those interview questions are specifically targeted towards our marketing effectiveness. I've seen a lot of work around brand awareness. Like you'll see it on YouTube all the time. Have you heard of any of these 4 brands? And
Yep.
they measure, well, how strong is our awareness? What I haven't seen a lot of people do is measure brand impact. Like, okay, yeah, your brand is known about, but the content piece you made or the messaging that you created or the event that you put on or the podcast that you have, how much did that actually impact the buyer's decision making? And a lot of times we as marketers have been trained, this is kind of what I touched on before, to measure that with touch points. For example, you'll pull a report in the CRM and it'll show a closed won opportunity. So this was somebody that we won over and we convinced to buy us. And we'll look through the touch points. We'll be like, oh, they downloaded this ebook, they attended this webinar, and we sent them this direct mail piece. Marketing did these 3 things that influenced revenue. But nobody ever asked them, well, were those positive touch points or negative touch points? We just assume they were positive because they ended up winning the deal, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, they must have loved the webinar. We must have loved the direct mail. They must have loved whatever else it was, this content piece. But when you go and ask them, they might actually say something like, well, yeah, I was on board. I loved what you were doing until kind of I went to this event and it actually confused me because it didn't sound exactly like what the sales rep was selling me. So the event and the sales rep have different messaging, like it's not aligned. Or they'll mention things like the direct mail campaign that you did, like you guys were supposed to send me AirPods and they never arrived. And so it kind of was a negative experience, but you know what? I really love your tool. So I'm still going to like go with you. That actually just recently happened to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is
And
oddly specific.
yeah. And there was another one early in my career. I did a direct mail campaign where it was cheap, I'll admit it, but I sent like a lot of cheap headphones to one company just to get their attention. It was like 10 to one team. Like I just wanted to make a big impact. And it was cheap headphones in like cardboard boxes and full of paper, like confetti, very, very not environmentally responsible, you could say.
Yeah.
And I got an email back from the head of that team and he was just chewing like angry. Like, this is the most irresponsible thing I've ever seen. My team doesn't need your cheap headphones. How dare you send this? Like very upset that I had done this. And then at the end of the email, he said, but you know what? Your tool seems kind of interesting. So I actually would love a demo. I'm like, well, I guess I didn't need to go through the hassle of sending him 10 things. I just needed to tell him what we do.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we don't ask our buyers, like, what is the impact? So at Clozd, we ask that in every buyer interview we can do. And they're questions like, what marketing content made an impact in your buying decision? And whether that impact is good or bad. And we just let them kind of express. Or were there any events that we put on that really helped you understand what we do or motivated you? And they'll report those things back and we score their answers. So we score it from a -2, that's like a strong negative, to a +2, a strong positive, and then neutral is 0. So I actually have a score inside of our platform where I can look across all of our buyer interviews and see the average of how our content marketing performs. And then I can put a goal for my content marketing team and say, this score should never be below a 1. And if like we're really pushing it here, we should try to get to this to a 1.5. And then they'll see things come through and it helps us decide like our content roadmap. Like how do we prioritize? What should we change? What assets should we build? What courses should we build? What podcasts should we launch? All of those things. It helps us understand how should we change the message? Are we confusing people? And I don't see like hardly any marketers doing this at scale where they're actually scoring people's responses, asking what the brand impact is, not just what brand awareness is for your company, right? That's how my content team gets very, very, very keyed in to revenue. And they actually feel like, for the first time in my career, I can send buyer quotes to my copywriters, my graphic designers, and my content lead and say, hey, you remember the effort you put into that one ebook or that one event that we did or whatever it is? Look at this. Like, look what this person said about it.
It made a difference.
So that's how we do it at Clozd. Yeah, it made a difference. Or, man, this thing isn't really hitting the mark. Like, we're confusing people. They're not understanding what we have. And I would push every brand marketer right now to try and do this at scale because it changes the entire ROI conversation. Right now, marketing ROI is measured by how much money did you put in and how did the systems attribute the effectiveness of that money. And if you're relying on systems, everyone knows this, you're going to miss a ton of the content stuff you do. Like, for example, this group therapy video like goes up and it's going to be really, really, really hard to track the impact it had, right? Whether it even brought a lead in, but even after the lead came in, like, did they listen to it? Did they listen to it and talk to somebody else about it and suggest, hey, Marq is doing this really cool thing around like thought leadership. We should check them out. I think they know what they're doing. I don't know how you would measure that in any way with the system. You could put it on your like lead gen form and say, how did you hear about us? And like, oh, I heard about you in the group therapy.
Yeah.
Great. You still don't know if they were motivated like enough by that, or if that's just how they heard about you and then something else motivated them, or how impactful it was to their decision-making process. So I would challenge brand marketers and marketers in general to start thinking about your ROI calculation differently than you've been trained with CRMs and systems doing it automatically for you. And one last note on that, like, I'll just tell you exactly how this is changing my perception of it here at Clozd. So last year, I was trying to decide what should my marketing mix be for 2023. So I went to the CRM, as I've been trained to do forever, and I pulled a huge report that was lead source attached to won opportunities. And then I calculated what was the CAC to LTV of those lead sources. So for example, events was one of the lead sources, and it had a good close rate on like helping ops get through the door as a lead source. But it was my most expensive channel as far as like the cost per one opportunity. The cheapest channels were organic search and digital ads, right? And as like historically in my career, I probably would have taken that and completely made my whole strategy this year with it. I probably would have said, you know what, events are too expensive and we can't scale them fast enough. We need to kind of trim back on that and not do it as much as we've been doing. And then now that I'm at Clozd, now what I do is I go and look in the Clozd platform at all of the interviews that buyers have done. And I look deeply when they mention events specifically. And a lot of times I'll compare those buyers to the CRM, and they never even, in the CRM, it was never tracked that they even were a part of this event. Like, we didn't even figure out they attended it or saw it or anything like that. So the CRM is blind. It's dumb. It doesn't even understand these people were impacted by the event. But then when I read what they say, they're like, well, you put on this event and I saw it last year. And because of that event, I knew when I had budget, you were the only win-loss vendor I was going to even look at. I just knew you guys were the thought leader. Nobody else would even come close. When I have budget, when I convince the team, I'm going with you guys. And it took them like a year to come in to our pipeline. So the CRM is dumb. It's blind to that stuff. And if I just looked at the CRM, that's what I meant by like, don't trust your CRM so much to guide you. I would have scaled down events and probably cut some things. But that's not what I did, because events in our world are not just a lead source opportunity. They're a brand impact revenue opportunity. And the only way I got to that was, exactly.
I mean, that's, first of all, an amazing testimonial from a customer, but for them to have the awareness that you exist and there's no one else on their radar, those are the quality leads that you want.
Yeah.
And that
And the
comes from
CRM would never
that
say
experience.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then even if we had lost that deal, the CRM loss reason would say something like, if your CRM is even good, it would say something like pricing. I've seen a lot of cases where the CRM loss reasons say things like no decision, lost to competitor, went dark. And in my mind, those aren't reasons. Those are outcomes. And that's like asking LeBron, hey, why did you lose that game? And he says, because we lost. The competitor was better. Like, well, yeah, of course, LeBron. Like, that's not helpful. Thanks, man. So a lot of times, actually, when we did that analysis I talked about earlier, we compared buyers to CRM loss reasons. The loss reason in the CRM, 44% of the time was just an outcome. It was like lost to competitor or no decision. It wasn't even a vague why at all. And so the CRM would never pick up something like that. The other thing the CRM doesn't pick up is your strengths. So as a content marketer, as a messaging lead in your company, in the marketing team or with the brand team, you have to understand, I think, more than your weaknesses, what your strengths are. Because your messaging on your website shouldn't be all about your weaknesses. It shouldn't be about why you lose. Like, hey, I know we're bad at this, but you should still check us out. Like, no one would ever make that their messaging headline.
Mm-hmm.
But you lean into your strengths. Like, the top headline on your website is going to be one of your key strengths, and all the supporting points are strengths that support that, right? But the CRM never really captures that. So the only way we kind of get to that is we go and talk to sales, like, well, what's resonating in the demo? And we listen to gong calls, like, how is the buyer reacting when they talk about this thing? And we're like this weird fly on the wall or spy, like trying to get to this answer. And it's way simpler than that. Like, you literally could just go ask your buyer, hey, what was really strong about what we did? Even if you lost, what was really strong? What almost got you there? And then you work on your weaknesses, but then you already have, like, man, these are our strengths. We should lean into these. These are why we win against our competition. And that's where your messaging should start. But your CRM data doesn't tell you that. Sales reps don't really, really know it. And if you try to get it through like conversational intelligence tools, it's filtered. Like, those are very, very, very sales context heavy conversations where a buyer is guarded. They are in negotiation mode. They're not going to show all their cards because they're trying to like hold some power like anyone does in a negotiation. They're not going to lay everything on the table, trying to hold some stuff back to maybe get better pricing or whatever. Or they're just like, I'm not really that interested, but I'm a nice person and I don't want to just be totally rude to you on the call and let you down. So you're not going to get the full truth or the full story in those things either. It like blows my mind that people don't just go talk to their buyers at scale and figure out their messaging and like their content strengths around in that way.
Yeah, for sure. I have I have a question, but it's brought up by some things that you've said. So, we talk about consistency, brand consistency. At Marq, we're about the content consistency, ensuring that, all of that content has a consistent look and feel, doing our best to ensure consistency in content messaging, right? And we're able to achieve that pretty well with, brand locking parameters, all these things that our platform can achieve. But what you brought up was sometimes your sales reps are communicating in a completely different way than your marketing is. And you find that out, after the fact when you're doing this win-loss analysis. So I guess my question is, you discover this, then what do people do with this information? How do you correct that path so that that's not an issue?
I kind of have a different viewpoint on this because I grew up in tech and in marketing in the SDR world where I was more in sales than in marketing. I didn't come from like the agency background where it's like everything has to follow a brand guide and a brand standard. So let me give you a really good example from my career of how I've seen. This is going to sound really bad, but I don't know how any other way to say it. Like, sometimes there's an ego on the side of marketing that they're the only ones that can do it right.
Yeah.
And the best example I've seen of that falling on its face in my career was we had just launched this new product at a company I was at, and the product marketing team spent, I don't know, a full quarter at least, if not more, creating buyer personas and creating an entire new sales deck, new sales conversation approach, new demo based on the challenger methodology, right? Where you challenge the buyer, you educate them, you bring them through this emotional journey.
Yep.
And we went to our SKO, and the sales leader had invited a well-known leader of like our buyer personas, right? So he was exactly who we're trying to sell to, very influential, knew the inside and out of our buyer personas world better than any of us knew it, because we had literally just entered this world like 6 months ago. And this guy had been doing that job for 20 something years, right? So he got up and kind of presented like, here's my thoughts on the state of things in my world, in your buyer's world. And the product marketing team got up and presented what they had been preparing for the last quarter. It was a new slide deck that marketing had even, like creative, had polished for them, and it was on brand and it was beautiful, right? And copywriters had polished it and made the copy perfect. So they presented this whole thing, and you could feel like the air in the room just leave, and you could feel the sales team just kind of like they were just not impressed. They were kind of shaking their heads. And the sales leader did something that was pretty bold. Honestly, he asked this buyer persona thought leader that they'd brought on, like, what do you think of this thing that product marketing just presented? And I feel bad for the guy, but he just was like put on the spot, and he said, this doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't hit the mark at all.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they had done their normal thing of like, let's go interview a couple of people in this space and let's apply like our perception to it, and let's get creative on it and make this super polished. And it fell flat on its face. I think if it had been more agile of an approach, like, here are 5 key points that we feel good about, but it's not a fully baked like brand deck or anything like that. It's probably a good one, but let's go out, let's get our sales team out there, like, let's move and see what happens, and then start to calibrate based on what our buyers are telling us after the fact and be more agile. I think a lot of times we fall into like waterfall marketing instead of making it agile. And I talk about this a lot on my team, where a lot of companies I've been in, they're like, hey, we're going to go do a website redesign. And it's like this one-off thing in your mind, and it takes forever because everyone wants their hands in it, and you're looking at all the analytics, and it's like a slow-moving beast of a project. In some companies I've been in, I worked there for like 3 years, and they talked about the website redesign all 3 of those years, and it never happened. So I was like, man, this is weird. And I think sometimes holding those standards and those guides like too tight makes for inefficiencies. And in my mind, like, your website should be a living and breathing thing based on how your market's moving, based on what your buyers are telling you, based on your win rates, based on all these factors, new features that come out. Like, it should not be this static, all right, let's do this huge brand refresh and then do another one. Like, it should be constantly in motion. And if you've put too many guardrails in place and haven't given people freedom to explore things within, like, obviously some guardrails, like, don't ever say the F word on our website, or like, let's not be crazy meme or crazy funny, like, have some brand persona guidelines, right? I think that's better than being very, very, very prescriptive with it. The other thing I see is, I don't think you're ever going to solve the like shadow content problem that people feel is a problem. Sales reps are always going to feel like, most of the time, the very successful ones, they're probably always going to feel like they could probably make a more impactful slide deck than your creative team, right? And you should help them and rein it in, but make it more collaborative. Like, yeah, they have insights. Another example is, like, when I was an SDR, we had a copywriter and a marketing manager build us an entire email campaign. And it was amazing copy, like super well written and very witty and very clever, very cool. And when we launched that campaign, all of the SDRs, we were very junior. We didn't know. We were like, man, this is so awesome. We have this help, and this amazing witty writer is going to help us. That campaign was so bad. It didn't get any responses. And they came back and like, we don't understand like what's going on. And what is your most like highest open rate and highest replied to email? And what's the difference? And I showed him the most replies I get is an email that's like 2 sentences and it says, "Are you the right person that I should talk to about this or not?"
That's
And
right.
it's yeah, like a copywriter doesn't need to come in and tell a salesperson how to do prospecting. And I think a lot of times that happens with the demo environment. There's some areas you probably should put tighter controls on. We've had this slip a couple of times at Clozd where our social media presence, as a newer company, we're trying to establish what should our brand really be, what should our brand voice sound like, and that kind of thing. So we've experimented with some things like, should we be more funny and more memes, and does that work better for our audience versus like buttoned up and polished? And some of that is what we do is very sensitive data. Like we can't be very funny all the time. People have to trust that if we get all your buyer feedback and we know exactly what your deals look like, that you trust we're going to hold that and maintain it and be secure.
Yeah.
So if we're just out joking all the time, we lose that, right? So there's been a couple times we're like, let's add a little more personality into Clozd, and then all of a sudden on the sales team, it goes off the rails and they're doing things that we hate on LinkedIn. So I've had to rein it in. But I think holding it too tight or doing it in too much of a waterfall approach, in my experience, often is more of a miss and a waste of time than being more agile with like
Yeah.
not as strict guardrails.
I mean, I think to your point, it's also a difference of enabling your sales team to be able to do what they do well, giving
Yeah.
them the tools that they need in order to accomplish that. And the freedom to be able to iterate on, things that are resonating from their experience from them directly communicating with our target
Yeah.
buyers, right?
Totally. Yep.
And
And
it's, not holding the brand hostage, not saying
yeah,
only the creative team can create these things.
right.
'Cause that's not gonna work. It's gonna slow you down too. It's like that's
Mhm.
impossible to keep up with that amount of requests and keep moving and be agile, as you said.
Yeah.
So there is that balance for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you come at it, like I've seen it approached two different ways in my career where there's kind of the ego and sales immediately feels it, where it's like, you guys don't know how to write or design. We're the only ones that can do this. So hands off completely. Like, don't ever try anything. Like, just go away. And you
Mhm.
approach it that way. That's when you get, I think, more of this shadow marketing where they don't really trust what you built, but they're too afraid to ask for help for you to help them build something cool.
Yeah.
So if you come at it more of, I want to help you, this is my skill set, and let's make it this collaborative. Like, you tell me how I can help. And if you approach it that way, especially on the design side, sometimes you get designers that like everything they touch, they feel like is their Mona Lisa, and they can't take criticism to it. Um, and they think like whatever they do is the best, versus other designers that are understand like there's a lot of inputs that come into this. This isn't my individual piece of art. This is a collaborative thing, and my specialty is making it look polished. My specialty isn't to be the mastermind behind the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's an approach that makes the shadow marketing content go away, where you actually have salespeople coming to you and requesting, "Hey, I need this. I need help. Can you polish this?" And that's step one. Step two is if you have created an inefficient marketing engine where every time they come and request, you shut them down, or you don't have bandwidth, or you don't have resourcing for them, they're going to stop coming to you as well. And all of a sudden, the shadow marketing comes back, right? Like
Mhm.
they're going to do it unless you're there to help them. So if you can solve those two problems, I think more often than not, sales and other departments will come to you and say, "I don't want to build this. Like, you guys will make it awesome. Come and help me build it." Right?
Yeah.
Instead of feeling like, well, marketing thinks I'm an idiot and I'm not. So I'm going to do this and prove to them that I'm not.
Yeah, and I think, true enablement is going to happen through effective collaboration. So you're giving them the things that they need in order to fulfill their intention, whatever that is, and vice versa. And
Yeah.
that collaborative effort is ultimately what's going to lead to more wins.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I could talk to you all day And this has been so fantastic. I appreciate you
I'm
so
glad.
much. And I am going to recommend for anybody who watches this or listens to it to follow you on LinkedIn because you always are sharing really great nuggets and we appreciate it. So thank you so
Thanks.
much for your
Thanks,
time.
Katie. Yeah, it was a fun thing to be on and great to talk to you too. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a good one.
You too.